Hey everyone, welcome back to Speak Up, the podcast that helps you learn English fast and speak confidently in real-life situations. I'm your host, Ryan, and as always, I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Priya. Before we dive in, let me ask you something. Have you ever learned a new English word, felt really excited about it, and then, when you actually need to use it, it just vanishes from your brain? It's frustrating, right? You put in the effort, but somehow words just don't stick. Why does this happen? And how can we fix it forever? That's exactly what we're going to talk about today.
That's right, Ryan. And trust me, this happens to almost every English learner. You hear a new word, maybe you even write it down, but when you try to use it, your mind goes blank. And here's something shocking. Scientific studies show that most people forget 50% of what they learn within just 1 hour. You could spend time learning new vocabulary only to forget half of it almost instantly. But what if I told you that you don't have to forget words anymore? You can learn a word today and still use it naturally months, even years later. Sounds too good to be true? Well, it's not, because today, we're revealing powerful science-backed techniques to make English words stick in your brain permanently. Stay with us. You're about to discover the secrets that will change the way you learn English forever.
Let's first understand the science behind why we forget vocabulary. Many English learners feel frustrated when they learn a new word, use it a couple of times, and then realize they can't remember it later. But this isn't your fault. Our brain is designed to forget information that it doesn't see as useful. There's a concept called the forgetting curve, discovered by a German psychologist, Hermann Ebbinghaus. It shows that we forget nearly 50% of what we learn within an hour if we don't review it. After a few days, almost 80% of the information is gone. This is why so many people struggle to expand their vocabulary. They assume just reading or hearing a word once is enough, but without reinforcement, the brain simply erases it.
Exactly, Ryan. This is why so many learners feel stuck. They might read English books, watch movies, or even take grammar lessons, but later, they can't recall the words they learned. That's because memorization without usage doesn't work. Our brain constantly filters out information that seems unimportant. If a word isn't used in real-life situations, it gets erased. That's also why many learners struggle with fixing English grammar mistakes. They memorize rules but don't apply them naturally in conversation. Another issue is translating words in their head before speaking, which slows them down even more. It's a sign that their brain hasn't fully absorbed English yet.
That's so true, Priya. Many learners think they can fix this problem by repeating words over and over, but repetition alone isn't the solution. The brain doesn't just store information because we see it multiple times. It needs to be triggered in the right way. For example, if you see a new word in a book but never use it in conversation, your brain assumes it's unimportant and forgets it. This is one of the common English mistakes people make when trying to expand their vocabulary. Instead of memorizing long word lists, they should focus on practicing words in real-life contexts where their brain actually sees value in remembering them.
Yes, and this is something every learner should understand. Forgetting is normal. It doesn't mean you're bad at learning English. It just means your brain is doing its job, filtering out what it thinks you don't need. If you don't use a word, your brain won't save it. That's why people forget words so quickly. The real solution isn't just memorization. It's making vocabulary a natural part of your thinking process. And that's what learners need to focus on if they want to stop translating in their head and start speaking fluently.
Now that we understand why we forget new words, let's talk about the biggest mistakes people make when trying to learn English vocabulary. A lot of people feel frustrated because they learn new words, but when they try to use them in conversations, their mind goes blank. And guess what? It's not your fault. Most of the time, the problem isn't about how hard you're trying, it's about how you're learning. One of the most common mistakes I see is memorizing long word lists without any context. You know what I mean, right? Writing down dozens of random words every day, trying to force them into your brain. But tell me this, how many of those words do you actually remember after a week? If the answer is not many, you're not alone. Our brains don't work like that. We don't memorize words by just staring at them. We remember words when they have meaning, when they are connected to real-life situations.
Exactly, Ryan. And you know what's interesting? This is something even advanced learners struggle with. Many people think, if I write a word 10 times, I will remember it. But the reality is, without usage, words disappear from memory. Think about it. How many times have you learned a new English word, felt excited about it, but then never actually used it in a sentence? The next time you need that word, it's already gone from your mind. That's why real-life English conversations are so important. It's not just about learning words, it's about using them. If you don't use a new word in conversation, your brain thinks, oh, this isn't important, and it deletes it. You need to give your brain a reason to remember it.
That's such a great point, Priya. And I want to add another big mistake, trying to learn too many words at once. So many learners think, I need to expand my vocabulary fast. Let's learn 100 new words today. But what happens the next day? They forget almost everything. This is called information overload. When your brain gets too much new information at once, it can't process and store it properly. Think about when you eat too much food in one sitting. Your stomach feels uncomfortable, and you can't digest it all at once. The same happens with learning. Instead of quantity, the real secret is learning fewer words, but actually using them. Let's say you learn just 5 new words today. If you use them in different sentences, write them in a short story, or speak them out loud, those 5 words will stick with you. That's why English conversation practice alone is such a great technique. When you say the words out loud, your brain stores them better.
Yes, and let's talk about another huge mistake, fear of speaking. A lot of people learn new words, but they never use them because they're afraid of making mistakes. Let me ask you this. Have you ever wanted to say something in English but stopped yourself because you were scared of saying it wrong? This is something that happens to so many English learners. They think, what if people laugh at me? What if I sound stupid? And because of that fear, they just avoid speaking. But guess what? This is the exact reason why many learners struggle with fluency. You can't get better at speaking English if you don't actually speak. Making mistakes is part of the process. The more you practice, the more natural those words will feel.
That's so true, Priya. And I'll add one more mistake, not surrounding yourself with English. Some learners only study English when they sit down with a book. But learning English is not just about study time. It's about daily exposure. Think about how children learn their first language. They don't sit down and memorize words from a textbook. They hear their parents, they listen to conversations, and over time, words become natural. The same rule applies when you're learning English as a second language. If you really want to improve, you need to immerse yourself in English. Listen to podcasts, watch English movies, read articles, make English a part of your daily routine. The more English you hear and use, the easier it will be to remember words. Real-life English conversations help you retain words better than memorization ever could.
Absolutely, Ryan. And here's something most people don't realize. If you keep making these mistakes, you'll always struggle with English vocabulary. The good news? There are proven techniques that actually work. Imagine learning words in a way that they stay in your memory forever. No more forgetting, no more frustration, just smooth, natural English. So instead of repeating these common mistakes, let's talk about the smartest ways to learn and remember new words for life.
Now that we've discussed the mistakes people make when trying to remember new words, let's dive into something even more important: how to learn and remember vocabulary the right way. Think about this. You learn a new English word, and instead of forgetting it, you can recall it instantly when you need it. No more awkward pauses, no more struggling to find the right words in a conversation. But the real question is, how do you make this happen? Well, there are 3 simple yet powerful methods that will help you lock new words into your memory and start using them effortlessly. And the first method is incredibly effective, using words in real-life sentences. Let's talk about why this works so well.
That's a great point, Ryan. A lot of people make the mistake of memorizing words without ever using them. But here's the reality. If you don't use a word in a meaningful way, your brain treats it as unimportant and forgets it. The best way to make words stick is to immediately use them in a sentence that's connected to your life. For example, if you learn the word astonishing, Don't just think of the definition, apply it to something personal. Instead of saying, the view is astonishing, say, the sunset I saw on my trip last weekend was absolutely astonishing. When you create sentences that are personal, your brain forms stronger connections, making it much easier to recall words later. And here's something even better. If you turn these words into short stories, they become even more memorable.
Exactly, Priya. Our brains are wired to remember stories. That's why learning words in isolation doesn't work, but placing them in a small story does. Let's say you're trying to remember the word hesitate. Instead of just memorizing it, create a tiny story like this. I was about to ask my boss for a day off, but I hesitated because I wasn't sure if he'd agree. See how that works? Now, whenever you think of the word hesitate, you'll instantly remember the story and the meaning of the word. It's such a simple yet effective trick.
That's a fantastic example, Ryan. But you know what's even more powerful? Speaking out loud while learning new words. And that brings us to the next technique, the shadowing technique. Have you ever noticed how children learn languages so easily? They don't study grammar rules, they just listen and repeat. This is exactly what shadowing helps you do. Here's how it works. Step 1. Find a short clip of a native speaker speaking English. It could be from a podcast, a movie, or even an audiobook. Step 2. Play one sentence. Pause it and immediately repeat it out loud, matching the tone and speed. Step 3. Keep doing this until your pronunciation and fluency improve. This method helps your brain absorb English naturally and trains you to think in English instead of translating from your native language.
That's such a powerful technique, Priya. Shadowing not only helps you remember words, but also improves your fluency and confidence. If you practice this daily, you'll start noticing a huge improvement in how naturally English words come to you. Now let's talk about another game-changing strategy: spaced repetition. Have you ever repeated a word over and over in one day, only to forget it completely a few days later? That's because the brain doesn't store information long-term unless you review it at the right intervals. Here's how spaced repetition works. Learn a word today and use it in a sentence. Repeat it after a few hours. Review it again the next day in a new context. Say it again after a week to reinforce it in your memory. This technique signals to your brain that the word is important, making it almost impossible to forget.
Absolutely, Ryan. And what's amazing is that these methods don't require hours of effort. Just a few minutes of practice each day using personal sentences, shadowing, and spaced repetition can completely transform the way you learn English vocabulary. So instead of struggling with memorization, focus on these 3 steps. Step 1. Use new words in real-life sentences, personal and meaningful ones. Step 2. Practice shadowing. Listen and repeat after native speakers. Step 3. Space out your learning. Review words at the right time for long-term memory. If you follow these techniques consistently, you'll never forget words again. And trust me, there's an even faster way to make new words feel natural when you speak. Let's get into that next. Let's get into...
All right, we've talked about different ways to remember words, but there's something even more important: how we connect words to real experiences. Our brains love stories, emotions, and meaningful situations. That's why we remember the words that made us laugh, feel excited, or even nervous. Think about it. Have you ever forgotten a word you studied but still remember a compliment someone gave you in English? If someone once said, "Wow, your English is really improving," you probably never forgot that phrase. Why? Because it had meaning for you. So instead of just memorizing words, the trick is to link them to moments that matter.
That's such an interesting way to think about it, Ryan. And it's not just compliments. We also remember words from emotional experiences. Maybe you had a job interview in English and kept hearing the word confidence. Now, every time you see that word, you think of that moment. The same thing happens when we watch movies. If you hear a powerful phrase in a film, like "I'll be back" from The Terminator, you never forget it. That's because movies give us a full experience with visuals, sounds, and emotions. If you want to remember words faster, watching movies and listening to real conversations is one of the best ways to do it.
Exactly. And that's why learning words in isolation doesn't work. If you just read a list of words, your brain won't care. But if you hear those words in a movie scene that excites or surprises you, they'll stick forever. A simple trick is to watch movies with English subtitles. When you hear an interesting word, pause, repeat it, and try using it in a sentence. This way, you connect words to real conversations, just like in everyday life.
And movies aren't the only way. Stories are just as powerful. Kids learn languages through bedtime stories because stories create pictures in the mind. If you want to remember a word, try making up your own short story with it. For example, imagine you just learned the word exhausted. Instead of just saying exhausted means very tired, create a fun sentence. Last weekend, I went shopping for 5 hours. By the time I got home, I was so exhausted that I fell asleep with my shoes on. Now, every time you hear the word exhausted, this funny image will pop into your mind and you'll never forget it.
That's a great technique, Priya. And you don't have to write long stories. Just a few words that create a strong image will work. Another trick is to connect words to personal experiences. Let's say you learned the word delicious. Instead of memorizing delicious means tasty, think about your favorite food and say, that biryani I had last night was absolutely delicious. Now, every time you hear the word delicious, you'll remember that moment.
Exactly. The more senses you use, taste, smell, emotions, the stronger your memory. Instead of just studying words, connect them to things that matter in your life. That way, English vocabulary won't just be words in your notebook, they'll be part of your real experiences.
All right, Priya, we've talked about how emotions and context help us remember words. But what about long-term retention? How do we make sure the words we learn today don't just vanish tomorrow? That's where smart techniques come in, like spaced repetition. It's one of the most powerful ways to store words in your brain permanently. Spaced repetition means reviewing words at specific time intervals. After a few hours, then a day, then a week, and so on. This method works because it refreshes your memory right before you forget. And the best part? You don't have to do it manually. Apps like Anki and Quizlet do the scheduling for you, so you just open the app, review your words, and let science do the rest.
That's such a game changer, Ryan. Most people think repeating words over and over in one sitting helps, but actually, our brain needs space between learning sessions to store information properly. That's why spaced repetition is so effective. It works with your brain's natural memory process. And then there's active recall. Instead of just rereading words, try recalling them from memory. Let's say you learned the word persuasive. Instead of just staring at its definition, close your book and ask yourself, what does persuasive mean? Can I use it in a sentence? When you force your brain to pull out the information, it strengthens the memory. It's like giving your brain a mini workout.
That's a great point. So many people just passively read words and expect them to stick. But the real trick is testing yourself. Think about it like this. If you're trying to get stronger, would you just watch workout videos or would you actually lift weights? The same goes for learning English vocabulary. You have to challenge your brain. One easy way to do this is with flashcards. But instead of just reading them, try covering the meaning and testing yourself. If you can recall the word without looking, that's when you know it's really locked in your memory.
Exactly. And to make it even better, you should create your own personalized vocabulary lists. We all learn different words depending on our daily lives. If you're learning English for work, focus on business English vocabulary. If you love watching movies, pick up words from dialogues. One trick I use is keeping a small notebook where I write down words I actually want to use. And for those who prefer digital tools, there are plenty of free English learning resources online that let you create customized lists. When you learn words that are useful for you personally, you're much more likely to remember them.
That's a fantastic tip, Priya. And here's another one. Use multiple methods at the same time. Don't just rely on one technique. Combine spaced repetition with active recall and personalized vocabulary lists. For example, learn new words with an app like Quizlet. Test yourself by recalling them from memory, and then write them in your personal notebook. This way, you're engaging with words in different ways, which makes them stick even better. And let's not forget variety. If you keep learning words the same way every day, it can get boring. Try switching things up. Use flashcards one day, listen to podcasts the next, and practice writing sentences another day. The more ways you interact with a word, the stronger your memory.
That's such an important point. Learning English should never feel like a chore. The more fun and interactive you make it, the easier it will be. So whether it's apps, notebooks, or even playing vocabulary games, find what works for you and stick with it. And remember, consistency is key. Even if you only learn 5 new words a day, that's over 1,800 words in a year. Imagine how fluent you'll become just by using the right techniques and staying consistent.
All right, Priya. We've covered how to learn and remember new words, but the real challenge is using them in daily life. Many people learn vocabulary but hesitate to speak because they're afraid of making mistakes. The truth is, the only way to speak English confidently is to actually use the words you learn, even if you're not perfect. Think about when you learned to ride a bicycle. You didn't wait until you were perfect before you tried, right? You just started riding, fell a few times, and eventually got better. Learning English is the same. You have to speak, make mistakes, and improve along the way. The more you use new words in conversations, the faster they become a natural part of your vocabulary.
That's so true, Ryan. And a great way to practice is by surrounding yourself with native content. Listen to podcasts, audiobooks, and watch TV shows in English. When you hear new words in different contexts, your brain starts recognizing patterns, making it easier to remember and use them. And here's another powerful trick: shadowing. This means listening to a native speaker and repeating their words right after them. It helps improve not only your vocabulary, but also your pronunciation and fluency. This technique is especially useful if you want to understand native English speakers and sound like a native speaker yourself.
Great point, Priya. And let's not forget about conversation practice. You don't need a native speaker to practice with. Just find a language partner or join an English conversation group. Even speaking to yourself in front of a mirror or recording your voice can help. If you can, try talking about real-life situations. Describe your day, explain your thoughts, or even pretend you're in a job interview using new words you've learned. The more comfortable you get with using English in daily life, the more natural it will feel.
Exactly. And here's a mindset shift that really helps. Stop fearing mistakes. Mistakes are not failures, they're signs that you're learning. The more mistakes you make, the faster you improve. Think about it. If you only speak in words you're comfortable with, you'll never expand your vocabulary. But if you push yourself to use new words in conversations, even if you say them wrong at first, you'll remember them much faster. And the best part, the more confident you get, the easier it becomes to express yourself. You'll stop hesitating, you'll stop translating in your head, and eventually, English will start feeling natural to you.
That's what it's all about, building confidence through real-life practice. So to everyone listening, take action today. Pick a few new words, try using them in conversations, listen to podcasts, and practice speaking daily. The more effort you put in, the more fluent you'll become. And here's the exciting part. If you follow these strategies, you'll never forget new words again. But there's one more challenge every English learner faces: your accent. Even if you know all the words, your pronunciation and accent can make a huge difference in how natural you sound. And guess what? We're covering that in an upcoming episode.
Yes. So if you've ever wondered how to sound more like a native speaker, or if you struggle with pronunciation, make sure to stay tuned. We'll be sharing some powerful techniques to improve your English accent and speak with more clarity and confidence. And before we go, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with anyone who wants to improve their English. Keep practicing, keep speaking, and remember, every mistake brings you closer to fluency. See you next time.